Miscommunication isn't just inconvenient, it's costly.
Communication, by its nature, is very much about inspiring, influencing, working with, challenging. And so to carry the weight of your vision is going to require
Hey, everybody, welcome to P Cubed, where we explore leadership, influence, and making an impact in today's world. I'm your host, Preston Poor, and today we're tackling one of the most critical issues, yet overlooked issues: communication. Many leaders struggle to clearly articulate their vision, engage diverse teams, and inspire action. My guest today, Chris Lambert, knows exactly what it takes to break through these barriers. As the founder and CEO of Life Remodeled, he has mobilized thousands of people to revitalize communities. His book, see this, Next Level Nonprofit, equips leaders to with the skills that they need to transform organizations. But before we dive into all that Chris is on right now, I want to tell a quick story about communication and hopefully get a little giggle out of this. But I was told a story in the Coca-Cola system a couple of years ago. And I was talking to a guy that actually lives overseas, and he related this story to me. It was pretty funny. But if you can imagine a group of Coca-Cola executives flying, getting on a plane, and they're going to a market, international market, Bogota, Colombia, going down there for a little bit of a market ride tour, but it was also a boondoggle. I assume a lot of people know what boondoggles are. So they were all excited about going. This executive delegates getting visas to his assistant. Okay. And so the visas are supposed to be distributed before they land. And so as they're flying through the plane flight's about 5 hours long as it goes, and they're, got the beverages out and they're having a great time and chatting on the plane, getting to know each other. And then all of a sudden the executive, right before they land, says, okay, to the assistant, why don't you hand out the visas? Well, the assistant proudly distributes them, but I bet you know where I'm going with this. There was a problem, right? They weren't travel visas. They were Visa gift cards. Visa gift cards. Interestingly enough, no travel visas meant no entry into Colombia. So think about it. Plane had to turn around. And then the executive actually on the plane erupts and says, how could you have possibly screwed that up? The assistant was really embarrassed and scared a little bit and said, I thought this was just a pleasure trip. You didn't mention anything about travel visas. Well, as you can imagine, there was silence, embarrassment, a lot of waste of time and cost and money and everything on that. Here's the net on that. Miscommunication isn't just inconvenient, it's costly. And whose fault was it between the two of those? Well, I would say it was both. I would say it was the executive who assumed clarity, and also the assistant who assumed meaning or intent behind that. So the key takeaway in all of this is this: great leaders ensure clarity, ask questions, and verify understanding. With that quick little anecdote, I want to bring Chris Lambert in to the interview. And thanks for listening to that, Chris. And just a quick little fun story from the Coke system of the world, a simple thing about communication. If you can imagine all the executives on the phone or on the plane being on there, and that would not have been a fun situation to be in. A real story, by the way, on all that. But everybody, I want to welcome Chris Lambert to the show today. And thanks for being here. Chris, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you, your background, where you're from, and what you do.
All right, Chris Lambert. I live in the city of Detroit. I'm married. My wife and I have two boys who are teenagers, and I am a follower of this Jewish construction worker who lived about 2,000 years ago. He was brutally murdered, and he came back to life, and he remodeled my life, and he's in the remodeling business. I'm also the founder of a nonprofit called Life Remodeled, which I'm sure we'll talk about today, that does neighborhood revitalization in Detroit. And I'm the founder CEO of an organization called Next Level Nonprofit that helps nonprofits significantly scale their impact all over the globe.
Yeah, that's awesome. Fantastic. I love the work that you do. I want to briefly, before we go into the questions and talk a little bit, I want to tell everybody how we met. I actually had a chance to speak to the New Canaan Society in Grosse Pointe, Michigan. And I was there with some folks, and in the morning, right before I got started, this stranger comes up to me and taps me on the shoulder and hands me this book. And he signed it, so kind, and he gave it to me right away. And Chris, I didn't know who you were, right? Didn't know you from Adam, but you were so generous to give it to me. He said, you know what? And I think you remember this. I just felt like you need to have this book and wanted you to have it. And so thank you for that. I left Grosse Pointe after that talk, and went directly down on vacation to the beach, and had the book, and I read it in 2 days. and it was fantastic. The reason being is because I've come from the corporate world and thinking about starting a nonprofit. Hint, hint. And some talk about that. We can chat about that later. But I just thought it was fantastic. The book, the way you set things up, the success you've had, and I thought that's why I wanted to have you on today, so our millennial audience can listen to your thought process. And the way that you see things, work through things, and actually communicate, because that's the major issue we want to talk to today is how do we communicate better as leaders. So let's turn to the book real quick. Tell me a little bit about the principles that it lays out for leadership transformation. How does
Okay.
effective communication play a role in turning a struggling organization into a thriving one?
All right. So the system is based on four key components that are at the foundation of any successful organization. And those four components are number one, team unity, number two, compelling vision, three, right strategy, four, discipline execution. And every time an organization grows in all four of those components, they're going to go to the next level and the next level after that, and so on and so forth. And so the foundation of everything is having the right people in the right seats that form a united team. And that doesn't happen accidentally, right?
Sure.
The vision piece and the strategy piece tie into a principle that we teach, which is creating and distilling your vision and strategy, your strategic plan down to only 2 pages, whereby the front page answers the question, where are we going? And the back page answers the question, how do we get there? And the reason it's so important to distill it down to 2 pages is so that everyone in the entire organization can be crystal clear on what is success, where are we going, who are we, why do we exist, and how are we going to get there? And then discipline execution is actually breaking that vision and strategy down to bite-size tasks, goals, functions that ensure we actually get where we plan to go.
That's awesome. I love the process. It's similar, if you will, in terms of the thought process we used at the Coca-Cola company, just on a grand scale, and it works. It does. I know it does because of the forethought that you put into it, the vision, the mission, and then all pulling it all the way through to your disciplined execution makes a big difference. But what role does communication play in those four steps for you in an organization?
I mean, it's at every single level. That communication is involved in all four of those key components. And what I want to say before I really unpack that
Yeah.
is we would call this an organizational operating system. And as I'm using those words, some of our listeners right now are like, what in the world is that? And we don't have one of those. I'm not sure we want one. And the reality is every single organization on the planet has an organizational operating system, whether they know it or not, whether they created it themselves, whether they inherited it. And it all goes back to those components of how do we attract, develop, and retain top tier talent? How do we do vision casting and strategic planning? And how do we or do we not execute on our plans? We're all doing those things, whether intentionally or unintentionally. And so if we can't readily rattle off right now through our own communication what our operating system is and how it works, it means that we're in a scary place where we're not going to be able to materialize the kind of visions that we have and that we carry. And so I'll unpack your question a little bit more, then feel free to stop me, interrupt me, and
No,
double
go
click
ahead.
wherever you want to. But if we talk about communication, all right, what is communication about? It's about interacting with others. I mean, certainly it could be communicating to ourselves, but if you're listening today and you have a vision for something amazing, there's that old saying that is true forever. And it's that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And so communication by its nature is very much about inspiring, influencing, working with, challenging others. And so to carry the weight of your vision far is going to require an incredible team of the very best and brightest people who are smarter than you are and I are in the areas where they are most gifted, so that we can together, united, achieve the vision that we have, right? And so communication when it comes to team unity is about learning how to attract the ideal team players to your organization. It's learning how to listen and ask the right questions when you're interviewing someone to find out if they actually are the right person And is this the right seat for them, right? It's once they're on your team, communicating in such a way that they feel inspired to get out of bed to do the work that they're doing. It's giving candid conversations when someone's missing the mark in a way that we deliver that hard truth in love that we shows that we care more about them as human beings rather than human doings. And all of that I just focused on about communication is just on that first component of team
Yeah.
unity. But obviously, if we're talking about vision casting, strategy, execution, communication's at the heart of all of it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. So, how did you're a great communicator. You're articulating yourself well. How did you learn all this? How did you learn to be a great communicator?
Well, through the school of hard knocks, through practicing, through life. I mean, I discovered I was a great communicator in high school when my speech class teacher said, "Wow,
Mhm.
you're really great at this." But what I want to unpack right now with all of our listeners is I actually did end up getting a doctorate in communication and preaching, and I studied the craft, and I became a church planner initially. And then I started Life Remodeled. And one of the biggest mistakes I ever made was I relied heavily on my ability to communicate. And I spent a lot of time sharpening my skills and my communication skills. And what I mean where that went wrong was I missed out on that reality that I just shared. That if you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you go together. And I started to shift when I realized that part about going far and together, that I needed to shift my communication on listening well, building an incredible team, and making sure that we have a shared vision and that we created the strategy together, that it wasn't something that I just brought down and delivered to people and said, "Hey, do this." And that strategy was realistic and ambitious.
Mhm.
And then communicating in a way that realized I needed certain people in certain seats that were much better than I was, and I'm not the person to communicate certain messages. And so communication shifted for me when I realized it was all about we, not about me and my abilities. Although my abilities obviously play an important role. And so it came to do with learning, what is my role? Who really am I? And what do I bring to the table?
Yeah. Really good. So I want to go. Do you have a point in your life where you recognize that you shifted that you mentioned? Was there a specific instance where you said, "Hey, man, this isn't working. This isn't what's going to take me to the next level," if you will, and where you made that change?
Yeah. So I started Life Remodeled in 2010, and we grew very rapidly. But it was in 2014 that somebody handed me this great book called Traction by Gino Wickman, who's a friend of mine. And this book was about a business operating system with many of the same principles that are in the Next Level Nonprofit book. There's actually many, many different business operating systems, and EOS is phenomenal. And I read that book, and I began to realize just how serious our problems were and how far away we are from those key components that I just mentioned. And then I saw a roadmap of how to get there. But the second thing I realized right away is someone needs to translate these principles into the social sector. Talk about communication, right? Because I literally tried to convince over 100 nonprofits to do EOS, and not a single one took me up on it. And the primary reason was because it speaks only business language. And many nonprofit leaders did not come from the for profit world. And so I realized that we needed to translate these principles as well as create some others and make it palatable. And so, so much at the heart of successful communication is meeting people where they're at. And I was spending a lot of time trying to convince people to get what I was saying, right? And so once we made those shifts, we developed an unbelievable team. Prior to that, I made a lot of bad hiring decisions. I didn't have any idea how to develop people. We had a great strategic plan that looked good on paper, but it wasn't being operationalized. And it just became so clear to me that I needed to focus a large amount of my time finding the most talented people I can find and creating a shared vision, because we were cycling through a lot of people. We were losing team members. We were outgrowing team members. We were paying people too little money, because I didn't think that it mattered that much to build a team that would go the distance.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about this idea about your, I guess, the vision and everything that you've worked on before. If you pull that together, you mentioned something about casting vision and thinking about that. The reason I ask, Chris, is because I've just gone through working with a nonprofit I'm sitting on the board of right now, and we had a vision session weekend retreat up in the mountains here in Georgia. And now we've landed on the vision, and now we've got to cast it. What advice would you have for a leader, small business, nonprofit in the corporate world right now, working through vision? How would you communicate that with your team? And I know it needs to be a shared vision, right? So how do you get there?
It's a process, and it starts with having a vision, discovering that vision, testing that vision, refining that vision, seeing how it lands, who it lands with, who it doesn't land with, making sure you're not giving too much too soon. What's the right amount? To who? To when? Why? Right? And so all these questions can't be answered in one setting or instantaneously. It's a journey, right? Of discovering what is inside of you and who and how to share it. And so I think the most important place to start in any vision is why. Simon Sinek wrote a great book, Start with Why. And his talk on TED is still one of the top 3 most viewed talks of all time. And if you've ever watched it, it has very poor audio and even visual quality, but the message resonates so deeply. Why is this vision so important to you, to the world, to your constituents, to the people that you're casting it to? Why? Always start with why. I'll give you an example of Life Remodeled, right?
Okay.
The reason why Life Remodeled exists is because Detroit residents have all the talent they need, but many don't have access to all the opportunities they deserve. I'll stop right there. Right? Another way to say that is talent is evenly distributed all over the world, but opportunity is not. And that is so compelling because that is our William Wallace war cry, right? That is what gets our team out of bed in the morning to do the incredible work that we do on a daily basis. That is what motivates donors to say, we need to do something about that. That is what rallies volunteers. That is what, because it is a why that everyone we want to work with agrees with. Now, there may be people that don't agree with that why, and that is perfectly fine, because if you're trying to create a vision that's going to literally reach everyone, uh, I, you need to teach me how you can do that. I've never found one.
Right. Yeah. Hard to do.
And
Certainly.
once you get your why, then you get your what down. All right. So I told you Life Remodeled's why. So what do we do? What does Life Remodeled do in response to that reality? Well, we work with communities and organizations to create neighborhood revitalization that lasts. Okay, that sounds good, right? That sounds like something a lot of people would be a part of, neighborhood revitalization that's not flash in the pan, but that's really going to move the needle, and it's sustainable. And then you ask the question, or the listeners asking the question, well, how do you do it? Right. And so one of the main ways we do that is we repurpose large vacant school buildings into one-stop hubs of opportunity for community thriving. And we fill these buildings with the best and brightest nonprofits that provide the services directly requested by community members, and we help them collaborate to make dramatic impact. Okay. So you see how what I did there was I moved from the why to the what to the how. And I'm trying to answer your question by giving you replicable examples.
Yeah.
But hours and hours and hours and hours of work went into refining those statements that I just gave you. And you notice I'm not using words like, what's our mission or what's our vision? Here's why. Because I've literally polled hundreds of people, asking them not to tell me what their mission statement is, but to tell me what is a mission statement. And for every human being that I ask that question to, I get a different answer,
Mhm.
widely different answers.
Mhm.
So part of clear communication for us internally in our team is we don't have a mission statement. We can tell you why we exist, what we do, how we do it. These are the three words that people are thinking through in their minds every single day all over the planet. They want to know why, they want to know what, they want to know how. So even the way that we communicate our vision is using terminology that people are regularly familiar with and they already understand. I don't want to take the time to explain to somebody what I think a mission statement is. Why would I
Oh,
do
yeah.
that? It's a
Right.
waste of everyone's time.
Right. Yeah, that's it. I've always talked about it has to be written on people's hearts and minds, right? And if you
Mm.
simplify it, like you just mentioned, with the why, the what, and then the how, people can follow that, and they should be able to not only tell you what that is, and for lack of a better word, repeat or regurgitate it back to you, but then also how do they fit into it? Because once they've bought into it, that shared vision, then they're going to join you in your journey to accomplish the mission. I want to throw two quick things at you. So I've written another book that we're trying to work on getting published, and I play with Simon Sinek a little bit because I know he says starting with why. I actually say don't
Oh,
start
let
with
me just
why.
pause you there and just say congratulations
Oh, well,
on
thank you.
writing yet another book from one author to another. Brother, that is incredibly rigorous work that really involves you understanding the vision and communicating it in a way everyone can understand. And that's impressive. Sorry, keep
Well,
going.
thank you. I appreciate that, Chris. Very much I do. But the idea here is I want to just play with this for a second. I say Simon Sinek says start with why. I say don't start with why, start with who.
Mm,
And it's our identity that would start with
mm,
on that. And then as you have your identity from an organization or as your individual, then you can start to move into your purpose and then into meaning and
yep,
into calling. And then I say, then actually into your mission, vision, and significance. I got this little model that I built against it. So, really good way to look at it, but it had a
yep.
little bit of a shift in play on that.
I love that. I mean, I think at the end of the day, we'd both be saying the same thing
Yeah,
because I'm a big believer as well. I write a whole chapter in my book about who is more important than how.
that's right.
Right? Dan Sullivan was one of the first to really unpack that idea. But I think you and I agree fully. And I like the way you're spinning it because it gets people to think critically about identity and then why coming from identity. That's beautiful.
Well, thank you. I like that. I might get you to take a look at the book and endorse it for me someday.
Okay.
Um, the other thing I want to play with on is the book is titled "How is Greater Than What,"
Hmm,
and so I see the string that goes from the why to the what to the how. But where I differentiate leadership is in the how,
hmm,
and so you are demonstrating a fantastic how, the way you go about things. You and another nonprofit might have the similar what, but it's how you get there, right?
hmm.
It's how the people that you attract, it's the way you get there, the means that you do things, and your results eventually will outshine the other one, if you will. So that's my new piece here that I've kind of flipped things around using these investigative words when I took journalism in high school: the who, what, where, when, why, and how, right? But it keeps things so darn simple if you can get people to think about it. To your point, fantastic. Tell me a little bit about how you inspire donors. I'm always curious about this through communication. How do you use storytelling in that? Is it hard? I have a hard, honestly, if I start a nonprofit, one of the things I can't do very well, Chris, is ask people for money. Be quite frank with you. Now, I was in sales for years at Coca-Cola and marketing, and then also in Hershey, and I sold all the time. But it was easy. I had some chocolate. I go into the buyer and say, "Do you want chocolate?" And they say, "Yeah, I'll take it." And I'd say, "How many?" And then boom, they order cases. But to go to somebody with a clear story,
Yep.
what you just alluded to earlier about, how do you rally people around the vision? But how do you integrate storytelling into wooing a donor and saying, hey, getting them to buy and say, hey, this is something worth investing your finite resource into?
Yeah. Before I answer that, I want to get to a more foundational element of what creates an atmosphere for success
Yeah.
in fundraising because I got to be honest. Not that I mean I've been honest the whole time, but I'm going to continue being
Thank you for
honest.
what you're
Say,
starting right now. Here we go. Why
finally,
not?
he's going to say something truthful. I'm going to continue being honest
There you
and
go.
in saying that I used to hate fundraising.
Yeah.
I felt like a used car salesman. One of the reasons I hated it is I was very focused on the performative nature of storytelling,
Mhm.
communication, and people used to tell me all the time, "Man, Chris can sell ice to an Eskimo," right? Not that I ever would have any desire to do that, but I looked at sales like that, and it was very draining, and frankly, it was nowhere near as effective as I am today. And the shift came in realizing something again that goes back to like our elementary years of education. It's funny how some of the most important lessons are so simple and foundational. And it's this, right? That you know this to be true. People want to know how much you care before they care how much you know.
Yes.
And when it comes to fundraising, so there's two types of fundraising. There's transactional and then there's transformational. Transactional fundraising is basically, hey, you got money, we need money. And I'm going to tell you why our cause is so valid and important so you can give your money to our project, right? That's very transaction focused, unfulfilling for the donor. Some will still do it anyway and they'll give, but they'll give nowhere near the amount they would give if it becomes a transformational relationship.
Mm.
And so here's what I've learned in communication about fundraising. My path to a funder who's a high net worth individual is not to come in there with a slideshow, not to come in there with a deck or something printed out and start selling them on why this is great. My job is to find out who they are, why they get out of bed. What are their values? What are they passionate about? Tell me about your family. Tell me about your business. Tell me about, teach me who you are, why you care about what you care about. In the midst of that, if I start to pick up on there are threads that are in alignment with who we are and what we do, the conversation shifts to where now I don't need to sell anybody on anything. I actually have something to offer them that will help them increase their values, their passions in the world. And so what I invite people to do after I understand who they are is let's look shoulder to shoulder at a horizon that we can imagine together, that we can create together. And I paint that picture of that horizon with a 30,000 foot view. Then I'll bring it down to a 3,000 foot view, but we're not really going to get to the earth and that when I'm casting vision. And what I mean by a 30,000 foot view, that really starts with why. That starts with imagining the future we want to create. And storytelling is the most effective form of delivering information on the planet. Always has been since the cave people days, always will be. There's something about story. I constantly am telling stories about the great things that have happened, and I really focused on an individual rather than data. Um, and then I help people realize they can create more of those stories in the lives of now thousands of people. And there's something about story that is so much more effective because it's not telling anyone what to think. It's not saying you should do this or you should do that. Or if you're a good person, you do these things. If you're a bad person, you do these other things. It's inviting people into an adventure in which they can choose their own way to engage or not engage.
So good. So good. So I hear from a corporate perspective and profit world, if you will, perspective, it's like a consultative selling process, right? So you're going to learn more about the customer, not to manipulate, but understand how you can make the connection and then help them and then pull them in to have a shared vision and shared mission on all that. So that's a big difference. The reason I ask is because I have people come sometimes, and we all do, right, and ask us for money, and a lot of times it's transactional, and I don't hear from them again till the following year, or I get invited to a dinner or something like that. But you know, the reason you're going to the dinner is because they have an ask. So the question is, how does it become transformational? I think one of the biggest ways, from my perspective as a donor, not that I donate much money, but is that I want to be involved in the organization, right? Somehow that I can support, go work with. I know that my son-in-law and my daughter in New York City are part of a nonprofit up there, and they go up and serve on Saturdays to serve meals and stuff like that. But they give as well, so they're invested in it, right? And that would be the transformational part a little bit, wouldn't you think?
That's a big part of it.
Yeah.
And also the relationship that exists. So people give to people. You can have a nonprofit idea that's literally the best idea in the world. But if you don't have relationships with individuals, people, corporations, or whoever that have the means to be able to contribute financially to make that idea a success, that idea is going to go nowhere. On the other hand, if you have all the relationships in the world, but an idea that really isn't thought out and doesn't produce great results consistently, then the money is eventually going to dry up. So it's really both and. But when it comes to fundraising, it is 100% about relationships. And this is what I mean, getting to know the donor for who they actually are, not so that you can judo flip it into the perfect ask, right? But so you develop a long-standing relationship. Now you can't do that with everybody in an organization who's giving $10, $50, $100.
Right.
I mean, some giving just is transactional, and that's okay, right? Like we post something on a website, and people give $100. But I used to have relationships like that. Then I got to relationships that were 5-figure gifts and 6-figure gifts and 7-figure gifts now. And I wouldn't have gotten there without learning the lessons that I learned along the way. But the number one lesson that I've learned is it's all about relationships all
Yeah.
day. And so communication,
Oh, yeah.
again, one of
Yeah.
those elementary lessons. We got two of these.
Yeah. That's right.
One of these,
Yeah.
it's all about asking the right questions with this, listening here, and then speaking into someone's heart once you know who they are.
So for the listeners today that didn't see Chris, he's speaking about the 2 ears and 1 mouth that we have, and we've all grown up with that, certainly. It's just the what I call connection, Chris. There's going beyond communication. It's into relationship, connecting with someone's heart. There's John Maxwell. I know you're probably familiar with John Maxwell. He has one of his principles is you have to win someone's heart before you can ask for their hand.
That's good.
Think about that. And so it's not to manipulate, but it's let's do this together and invite you into what we're doing. That's a big difference. And that's communication, that's connection, and that's taking it to the next level. Hey, I've got three more things I want to before we wrap up. Tell me more about this next level nonprofit, and what your plans are on this and why you're doing this, because I want you to tie that into what you are doing next, meaning that you have something else going on that will have been announced already when this airs. But would you share with us what's going on?
All right, let me practice what I preach and start with
That's
why
right.
I wrote the book, why we created this system, Next Level Nonprofit. And it is because, and I'm sure you agree with this, we believe that people served by nonprofits deserve the highest levels of excellence the nonprofits can give. And so, because of that, I wrote this book that contains the entire system so that organizations can self implement these principles anywhere in the world. However, we've proven that organizations who experience our coaching, they grow much further, much, much, much faster. And so we now coach organizations globally. Currently, we have 16 coaches in 14 states and 2 countries. And our goal, we have a vision for the future is to coach 6,000 nonprofits over the next 10 years. And so the only way that was going to happen was by me transitioning from the CEO of Life Remodeled to focus full time on Next Level Nonprofit, which is what I now do. And we're building this dream team of people who believe in this vision and creating something that is nonprofits are not familiar with. Most nonprofit organizations that I've witnessed, probably 95% aren't even putting into practice 70% of these tools and principles that are in this book. And a lot of them don't even know what an organizational operating system is, so they don't know why they need it. So this is going to take a lot of communication effectiveness to reach nonprofits where they are, speak their language, to find the right coaches all around the country. And then we're also raising money to help nonprofits pay for our services. So we got to engage donors effectively. And back to the heart of this whole message today, communication will be at the forefront of all things that we're talking about.
Oh yeah, you'll need it certainly. Casting that vision, moving in, getting the right people on the bus, as Jim Collins said. By the way, Jim Collins, I know you know Good to Great because I know you've referred to some of the principles in there. I don't know if you know this or not, but he wrote an addendum to Good to Great for the social world, if you will, and the nonprofit. It's a really, really good read. And focusing instead of necessarily on return on investment, it's about impact and how do you get there. So, really good stuff. Hey, so I'm really curious because I know a lot of our listeners are listening to this because of my emphasis on living out your faith in the workplace. Tell us what role your faith plays in your leadership, in your organizations, and how you go about things.
Yeah, so this is the third nonprofit I've started now. The first I started was a church, and obviously, as a church, that's a faith community. But
Sure.
both Life Remodeled and Next Level Nonprofit are not religious organizations, but is my faith that drives me to do the work that I do. And I am constantly asking people, why do you get out of bed to do what you do? And people return the favor. People ask me, why do you do the work that I do? Which I love that question. And there is no other answer to that question than me telling the story of how Jesus got a hold of my life. And so I talk about that Jewish construction worker who lived 2,000 years ago, was brutally murdered and came back to life. And he remodeled my life, and he's in the remodeling business. And I tell that a lot in light of the Life Remodeled story, just because it's a unique way, but it's a true story, right? And I have actually found that I am able to share my faith more frequently and even more effectively in the work that I've done with Next Level Nonprofit and Life Remodeled than I ever was able to as a pastor.
Mm.
And I think the reason is this, and people have told me, right, that they have been so impressed with the action oriented posture of these two organizations that it makes them curious.
Mm.
But the other thing I realized is I'm telling stories, and no one argues with someone's story because it's not threatening. I'm not saying to anybody, well, you should believe in Jesus too, or you should get your act cleaned up. Or I tell the story of how I was way far away from Jesus as a alcoholic, drug user, womanizer, and didn't care about anybody but myself and my little group of friends, and how Jesus got a hold of my life. And I'm still learning and failing today, and I get open with my failures today and how God is at work. And people are so much more moved by that than about any sermon that I ever preached.
Yeah, it's that call it witness that you bear to the life transformation that you've encountered and experienced. And it's great how you're poured into, and then you can influence the world around you as you are right now, and the way you're working with others and starting these nonprofits and having the influence that you are. So, thank you for sharing that. It's kind of funny. You mentioned the remodeling. My wife and I were featured in a do-it-yourself DIY TV show years ago.
Wow, what's
It's
that?
yeah, it was. It's not available anymore, but it was HGTV. I think it was a subsidiary, and it was called Run My Renovation. And
Wow.
we did it when we lived in Knoxville, Tennessee. And the gist was is that they would come in the house and remodel the house, and the viewers got to pick like the cabinets or the bathtub and things like that. So it was kind of fun. But I wrote an article or blog not too long after that. Then the question was is who is running your renovation? Right, this idea of transformation. So it ties into everything that you were saying. So that remodeled, renovation, the transformation is a great subject to talk about. Certainly. Hey, before I let you go, what is one piece of advice that you would give our listeners regarding communication?
I like the phrase that Jesus says, where to whom, no, he says, he or she who's faithful with little will be given much. And so one of the things that I'm a big believer in is whatever you're involved in today, whether it's parenting, whether it's the company you work for, whether it's something you're doing with a nonprofit, be all in with that opportunity without just living in the future, but truly living in the present and stewarding that opportunity with grace, realizing that there's going to be elements of whatever you do that you do your best, that you're going to look back on 30 days, 90 days, 180 days from now and say, I can't believe I did that. Right.
Mhm.
But you did the best you could with what you had. Right. And more will come as a result of that by being fully integrous to just being present and being conscious of even reflecting on where did I do well, where did I not do well, and I'm going to get up tomorrow and I'm going to be a better version of myself by faith than I was the day before.
So good. So good, Chris. And it reminds me too, harken back to the story I told up front. You think about the executive and the assistant. If they had had some grace in the conversation and said, wait a second, I don't think I communicated that correctly. I didn't hear what you said. My fault, that type of stuff. That probably would have helped, right? And they could learn from that and go back, even though they had to turn back on a 5-hour flight to go back to the United States, which I'm sure was kind of
Well,
tough on them.
Preston, we have something in our system we call W3s: who, what, when.
Yeah.
Every single time a team member commits to something, we say who is doing it, what is it, and when does it need to be done by. When we say when, we use a principle that Brene Brown talks about: paint it done. And we together paint visually, not literally with paint, but through words, through communication. What does done look like, right? So done is, and you're a funny example before with Coca-Cola, you're going to hand us these visas that are going to enable us to be able to operate in the country legally. And then you ask the other person, what did you hear me say?
That's right.
Oh, you want me to buy some Visa gift cards so that you can buy stuff in this other country. Oh, I'm so glad you shared that. No, I don't need
No.
Visa gift cards, right? And so
Right.
when two people paint what done is and then they write it down,
Yeah.
there's no confusion about who, what, or when.
Yep, yep. It's that clarity of communication. Fantastic soundbite. I thank you for that. So wonderful job. Chris, you've been a gift to have on today. I mean, so much wealth of knowledge. I would highly recommend the audience, if they're seeing this, they pick up a copy of Next Level Nonprofit. It was intriguing enough for me to read at the beach. Of course, I love to read nonprofit, but I thought it was really, really well done. It's a toolkit, like you said, and I think you could take this and self-implement easily on it. Thank you for your work with Life Remodeled. Thank you for your presence, your leadership, everything about you, man. I hope we stay in contact as we go through all this stuff. And I want to thank the listeners today for tuning in, and hopefully you have gained something from this. And make sure that you subscribe and follow us on YouTube, LinkedIn, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all the social media things that we have going out there. Please just give a thumbs up, comment or something on that. We want to get the word out more so people can hear inspirational conversations like Chris and I just had. That's all for today. I'm Preston Poor. This is P Cube. Take care and talk soon.